The transport ship broke through the atmosphere shield and docked at Sentinel Prime. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the viewport, watching the massive orbital station grow larger. He had seen many impressive things in his military career, but nothing compared to this. The station was the size of a small moon, built from materials that seemed to shift colors in the starlight. Behind him, 50 of Earth's best soldiers prepared for disembarkation. They wore their standard uniforms, carrying equipment that had served humanity well for decades. Jake felt a knot of tension in his stomach. The invitation from the Galactic Council had been unexpected. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 5 years ago, and already they were being asked to participate in the trials of ascension. The airlock opened with a hiss. Jake stepped onto the station and immediately felt small. The corridor stretched before them, built for beings much larger than humans. The ceiling rose 30 feet above their heads. The doorways were massive archways that could fit 3 humans standing on each other's shoulders. Captain Lisa Grant walked beside Jake, her eyes scanning everything. She was his second in command, sharp and observant. "Sir, did you see the size of those handrails?" she whispered. "Whatever lives here must be huge." They didn't have to wait long to find out. A delegation approached from the far end of the corridor. Jake's breath caught. The beings walking toward them were at least 9 feet tall, covered in thick scales that looked like natural armor. Their arms were as thick as tree trunks and their eyes glowed with an orange light. These were the Vraxians, one of the most feared warrior species in the galaxy. Behind the Vraxians came others. The Keltharians moved with fluid grace despite their 8-foot frames, their skin a deep purple that seemed to absorb light. The Zenthor were the most intimidating, towering at 10 feet with 4 arms and faces that looked like they were carved from
stone. The Vraxian at the front stopped before
Jake. The being looked down at him with what might have been curiosity or contempt. Jake couldn't tell. "You are the humans?" the Vraxian asked, his voice like grinding rocks. "Commander Jake Morrison, Earth Defense Force," Jake replied, keeping his voice steady. "We're honored to participate in the trials." The Vraxian made a sound that might have been a laugh. "We shall see." He turned and began walking away. "Follow. Try to keep up." The human delegation followed through the winding corridors. Jake noticed how the alien warriors moved with casual confidence, their footsteps heavy and assured. Private Danny Pierce, one of their youngest soldiers, jogged up beside Jake. "Commander, did you see the way they looked at us? Like we're insects." "Keep your focus, Pierce," Jake said quietly. "We're here to prove ourselves." They were led to the residential sector. The quarters assigned to humans were in the furthest corner, away from the main training halls. The rooms were barely modified for human size. The beds were too large, the furniture too tall, the facilities designed for beings who didn't need the same amenities humans required. Sergeant Amy Collins dropped her pack on the floor with a sigh. "Well, at least we have a roof over our heads." "Sort of." The ceiling was so high that their voices echoed. The next morning they gathered in the main training arena. Jake had never seen anything like it. The space was enormous, divided into different zones for various types of combat training. Alien warriors were already practicing, their movements powerful and precise. The sound of their exercises echoed through the arena like thunder. An instructor approached the human group. He was a Keltharian, his purple skin marked with scars that spoke of countless battles. "I am Instructor Velkara," he said, his voice carrying an accent that made each word sound sharp. "You will train in Sector 7. Basic level." Lieutenant Chris Baker frowned. "Sir, we were told we'd be training with the advanced groups." Velkara's eyes narrowed. "You will train where you are assigned. If you survive basic training, perhaps you will advance. Most do not expect you to last a week." He led them to Sector 7, the area reserved for the lowest tier of trainees. Around them, alien warriors stopped their exercises to watch. Jake heard whispers and what sounded like laughter. A young Vraxian, probably their equivalent of a teenager, pointed at the humans and said something to his companions. They all laughed. The first exercise was simple: combat trials against training drones. Jake watched as a Vraxian stepped into the ring. The drone activated, moving fast and striking hard. The Vraxian blocked the attacks with his forearms, his natural armor absorbing the impacts. Within minutes he had destroyed the drone with his bare hands. The watching aliens nodded in approval. "Human, you are next," Velkara said, pointing at Private Danny Pierce. Danny stepped forward, his face determined. He was young but trained well. Jake had confidence in him. The drone activated, moving toward Danny with the same speed it had used against the Vraxian. The first strike caught Danny in the chest. He stumbled back, gasping. The second strike hit his shoulder, spinning him around. He tried to block, but his arms weren't strong enough to stop the drone's momentum. Within 30 seconds, Danny was on the ground, the drone standing over him. Velkara deactivated it. Insufficient, the instructor said simply. Next. One by one the humans tried. One by one they failed. Captain Lisa Grant lasted almost a minute, using her speed to dodge rather than block. Lieutenant Ben Carter tried to outsmart the drone, looking for patterns in its attacks. Corporal Nina Hayes attempted to use martial arts techniques. None of it mattered. They were simply outmatched by equipment designed for beings with natural advantages humans didn't possess. By the end of the first day, the human delegation was bruised, exhausted, and demoralized. They gathered in their quarters that evening, nursing their injuries. The medical supplies they had brought were already being depleted. Maybe they're right, Danny said quietly, holding an ice pack to his ribs. Maybe we don't belong here. Jake looked around at his team. They were good soldiers, every one of them, but this place was designed to break them. The aliens expected them to fail, expected them to give up and go home. In the corridors outside, he could hear the heavy footsteps of warrior species who had evolved for combat, who had conquered worlds and crushed enemies that humanity couldn't imagine. Sergeant Amy Collins stood up, wincing from her own bruises. We knew it would be hard. That's why we came, not to show them we're as strong as they are. We can't be, but maybe we can show them something else. What's that? Lieutenant Chris Baker asked. Amy looked at each of them in turn. We can show them that humans don't quit. They want us to fail in a week? Let's make it 2 weeks. Then 3. We keep going until they understand that breaking us isn't about hitting us harder. It's about making us stop trying. And we don't stop. Jake felt something shift in the room. The despair began to fade, replaced by something more familiar. Determination, stubbornness. The very human refusal to accept defeat just because the odds were impossible. She's right, Jake said. Tomorrow we start again, and we keep starting again every day until we figure this out. Outside their quarters, unseen by the humans, a Vraxian warrior paused in the corridor. He had been walking past and heard their voices through the door. He stood there for a moment, listening to the humans' plan for the next day despite their obvious pain and failure. Then he continued walking, but his mind was working. These humans were weak, yes, but they were also strange. Most species would surrender after such a day. These humans spoke of continuing. He would watch them tomorrow. Something told him it might be interesting. The second day began before dawn. While the alien warriors still slept, Sergeant Amy Collins gathered the human team in their training sector. The arena was empty and quiet, lit only by the dim emergency lights that never fully turned off. All right, listen up, Amy said, keeping her voice low. Yesterday was a disaster. We all know it, but I've been thinking about why we failed and I have some ideas. She pulled out a small tablet and projected images onto the wall. They were recordings from yesterday's training sessions, captured by the standard equipment all soldiers carried. Look at this. When Danny fought the drone, it used the same attack pattern it used against the Vraxian. But the Vraxian could tank those hits. We can't, so why are we fighting the same way? Lieutenant Chris Baker nodded slowly. You're saying we need different tactics. Exactly. The Vraxians use their armor and strength. The Keltharians use their flexibility and speed. We need to figure out what humans can use. They spent 2 hours before official training time analyzing the recordings. They watched each failure in slow motion, looking for patterns, for weaknesses in the drones, for anything they could exploit. When the other species began arriving for morning training, the humans were already sweating from their extra practice session. Instructor Velkara seemed surprised to see them ready and waiting. You return for more failure? He asked. We returned to train, sir, Jake replied. The morning exercises were brutal. The aliens ran courses designed for their superior endurance. Captain Lisa Grant pushed herself to keep up with a group of young Keltharians, but after 2 miles she collapsed from exhaustion. The Keltharians barely looked winded. They continued running, leaving Lisa on the ground gasping for air. But something happened that the aliens didn't expect. Private Danny Pierce, despite his injuries from yesterday, helped Lisa to her feet. Together, they finished the course even though they were the last ones by nearly 20 minutes. When they crossed the finish line, the rest of the human team was waiting, having already completed the run themselves but refusing to leave until everyone finished. A Zenthor warrior watched this with his forearms crossed. He leaned toward his companion and spoke in their clicking language. His companion responded, and both looked at the humans with something that might have been confusion. The combat trials came next. This time, when Danny stepped into the ring, he did something different. Instead of trying to block the drone's attacks like the Vraxians did, he focused on avoiding them. He moved constantly, never staying in one place. He didn't try to match the drone's power. He just tried to survive longer than yesterday. He lasted 45 seconds before the drone caught him. It was only 15 seconds longer than before, but it was improvement. When he left the ring, Amy and Chris were waiting with their tablets, recording everything. "Did you see how the drone telegraphs its overhead strikes?" Chris said, showing Danny the footage. "There's a 0.2-second delay. That's your window." "Show me again," Danny said, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. This became the pattern. Each human would face the challenge, fail, and then the group would analyze the failure together. They recorded everything, measuring their times, counting their mistakes, identifying patterns. The other species trained in the traditional ways, perfecting techniques that had been used for centuries. The humans were inventing new ones every hour. Corporal Nina Hayes made a breakthrough on the 4th day. She was smaller than most of the team, and the combat equipment was especially difficult for her to manage. But during her turn against the drone, she did something unexpected. Instead of fighting it head-on, she got close to it, too close for its long-range strikes to be effective. She couldn't damage it, but she survived for nearly 2 minutes before it adapted to her strategy. When she came out of the ring, she was grinning despite the bruises. "Did you see that? It couldn't hit me when I was inside its reach." "That's brilliant," Amy said, already typing notes into her tablet. "We've been thinking about this all wrong. We're trying to beat these challenges the way the aliens do. We need to beat them the way humans do." "What's the human way?" Lieutenant Ben Carter asked. Amy looked at the group. "We're weaker, slower, and less durable than everyone here. But we're also smaller, which means we're harder to hit. We tire faster, but we recover faster too. We can't win by being stronger. We win by being smarter." That night, after official training ended, the humans stayed in the arena. They had requested permission to use the facilities during off hours. Velkara had granted it, probably expecting them to give up after a few days. Instead, they were there every night, running extra drills, testing new ideas, failing and learning and trying again. Major Kyle Ross organized the team into training pairs. Each pair would practice against each other, trying new techniques and recording what worked. They shared every discovery with the entire group. There were no secrets, no competition between them. Every piece of knowledge was treated as valuable for the whole team. The aliens began to notice. It was hard not to. The humans were always training, always practicing, always analyzing. They filled notebooks with observations. They recorded everything. They measured their own improvements in fractions of seconds and celebrated each tiny victory. On the 10th day, something changed. The humans were running their morning drills when Jake noticed they were no longer alone in the early hours. A small group of Vraxian warriors stood at the edge of the training area watching. They didn't speak to the humans, didn't interfere. They just watched. The next morning, there were more watchers. Keltharians joined the Vraxians. By the end of the 2nd week, it wasn't unusual to see a dozen alien warriors standing silently around the human training area before official sessions began. Instructor Velkara noticed too. He approached Jake one morning, his expression unreadable. "Your team trains more than any group I have instructed. Why do you practice techniques that do not work?" "They don't work yet, sir," Jake replied. "But they will. You are the weakest species here. You have no natural advantages. Your bodies break easily. Your strength is insufficient. How do you expect to succeed?" Jake looked at his team, busy analyzing their latest training session. "Because we figure out what works, sir. We might not be the strongest or the fastest, but we can learn faster than anyone thinks possible." Velkara stared at him for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled up a holographic display and showed Jake the performance metrics from the first week. "These are your baseline scores, lowest in the station's history." He swiped to another screen. "These are your current scores. In 2 weeks, you have improved by 37%. The typical improvement rate for any species over the same period is 8%. Jake felt a surge of pride. We're just getting started, sir. Yes, Velkara said quietly, almost to himself. I am beginning to understand this. That afternoon, during combat trials, Private Danny Pierce finally defeated a training drone. It took him 3 minutes and 42 seconds, and he used a technique that no one had seen before. He combined Amy's close-range strategy with Chris's timing analysis and added his own improvisation. The drone couldn't adapt fast enough to his changing tactics. When the drone powered down, defeated, the arena went silent. Every alien warrior stopped what they were doing. They stared at Danny, this young human who had been knocked unconscious on the first day, now standing over a disabled training drone. Danny looked around at all the eyes on him. Then he shrugged and walked back to his team. I think I found a pattern in its adaptation algorithm. Let me show you. The humans gathered around him, ignoring the staring aliens, focused only on learning from Danny's success. They recorded his technique, analyzed his movements, and began planning how to teach it to everyone else. In the observation gallery above, 3 senior warriors from 3 different species watched the scene below. The Vraxian commander Throckmar spoke first. They celebrate one victory as if it were a conquest. The Keltharian High Master Velkara, the head instructor's superior, responded thoughtfully. They celebrate the learning, not the victory. Watch how they study his success. They will all use this technique tomorrow. The Zenthor war chief Zaxel, who rarely spoke, added in his deep voice, In 2 weeks, they have changed more than my warriors change in 2 years. This is not normal. The 3 leaders stood in silence, watching as the humans continued their training long after the session officially ended. None of them spoke again, but they continued watching. Something unprecedented was happening on their station, and they needed to understand what it meant. Week 3 began with new challenges. The instructors, seeing the humans' unexpected progress, decided to increase the difficulty of the trials. Velkara announced the change during the morning assembly, his eyes scanning the human group with an expression that might have been anticipation. The basic trials are complete, he said. You will now face intermediate-level challenges. These are designed for species with 5 years of training. Most of you have been here less than a month. The alien warriors nodded. This was expected. They had been preparing for this advancement their whole lives. But the humans exchanged glances that made Jake nervous. 5 years of training compressed into 3 weeks seemed impossible, even by their standards. The first intermediate challenge was a strength test. Teams of 5 had to move a massive stone block from one side of the arena to the other. The block weighed approximately 3 tons. Jake watched as a Vraxian team completed it in 4 minutes, their muscles straining but managing the task with raw power. When the human team approached the block, Lieutenant Ben Carter walked around it several times, examining it from every angle. We can't lift this, he said simply. We need another way. There is no other way, Velkara said. You lift or you fail. Corporal Nina Hayes knelt down, looking at the floor beneath the block. The surface is smooth. What if we don't lift it? What if we slide it? The team spent 10 minutes preparing. They used their uniforms to create padding beneath the block. They found the optimal angle for pushing. They synchronized their efforts, counting together to ensure they pushed at exactly the same moment. It took them 23 minutes, but they moved the block across the arena. Velkara approached them, his expression unreadable. You did not complete the task as intended. No, sir, Jake admitted. But we completed it. Yes, Velkara said slowly. You did. The combat trials became more complex. Instead of fighting drones one-on-one, teams now had to work together against multiple opponents. Captain Lisa Grant organized the human squad into formations they had been practicing during their night sessions. They used communication and coordination to make up for their lack of individual power. During one trial, they faced 3 combat drones simultaneously. Sergeant Amy Collins called out positions while Private Danny Pierce acted as bait, drawing the drones into positions where Lieutenant Chris Baker and Corporal Nina Hayes could exploit their blind spots. Major Kyle Ross provided covering support, creating distractions at critical moments. They didn't defeat the drones, but they lasted 8 minutes before being overwhelmed. The Vraxian team that went before them had lasted 11 minutes using their superior strength and endurance. The gap was closing. The alien warriors noticed. More of them came to watch the humans train. They no longer laughed or whispered mockingly. Instead, they stood in silence, observing every technique, every strategy, every adaptation the humans made. On the 25th day, something remarkable happened. The challenge was a siege defense simulation. Each team had to hold a fortified position for 20 minutes against waves of attackers. The position was a simple structure with limited weapons and resources. Most teams focused on fighting from the defensive position, using its walls and barriers to their advantage. Major Kyle Ross had a different idea. "We can't win by just defending," he told his team during their planning session. "We're not strong enough to hold forever. We need to change the battle." They spent their preparation time modifying the defensive position. They created false walls using loose materials. They built simple traps using equipment they found in the training area. They even modified the limited weapons to work in ways they weren't designed for. When the simulation began, the attackers came in waves, just as expected. But the humans didn't just defend. They used their modifications to confuse the attackers, leading them into traps and ambushes. Danny Pierce volunteered to leave the defensive position entirely, running out to draw attackers away from the main group. The simulation was supposed to last 20 minutes. The humans held for 47 minutes. They finally lost when they ran out of ammunition and their modifications stopped functioning, but they had exceeded every expectation. When the simulation ended, the arena was completely silent. Every alien warrior in the facility was watching. They had all stopped their own training to see what the humans would do. Commander Throckmar, the Vraxian leader, descended from the observation gallery. His massive form cast a shadow over Jake as he approached. "Explain your tactics," he demanded. Jake was exhausted, bleeding from a dozen minor wounds, but he stood straight.
"Sir, we analyzed the simulation parameters."
The goal was to survive, not to win through combat. So we focused on survival rather than defeating the attackers. "You modified the battlefield," Throckmar said. "This is not standard procedure." "No, sir." But it was effective. Throckmar stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned to Velkara. "Show me their training records." "All of them." From day one. That evening, Jake found Velkara waiting outside the human quarters. The Keltharian instructor looked different, less stern and more curious. "Commander Morrison, I have a question. It is not part of my official duties, but I wish to understand." "Ask anything, sir," Jake replied. "Your species fails constantly. Every day I watch you attempt things you cannot do. You fail, you record your failure, and then you attempt it again. Why do you not feel shame?" Jake considered the question. "Because failure isn't the end for us, sir. It's information. Every time we fail, we learn what doesn't work. That brings us closer to finding what does work. But you are weak. You have no natural advantages. How can you expect to overcome species who are superior in every physical way? Because we don't stay the same, sir. The Vraxians are strong today, and they'll be strong tomorrow, and they'll be strong next year. They're already at their peak. But humans? We're not at our peak yet. We're always improving, always adapting, always learning. Give us time, and we'll figure out how to overcome any disadvantage." Velkara was quiet for a moment. "You have been here less than 4 weeks. You have improved more than any species I have trained in my 30 years as an instructor. This should not be possible. Maybe it's not about what's possible, sir. Maybe it's about what we refuse to accept as impossible." The next day, the training arena was different. The alien warriors still trained in their designated areas. But now there were always groups watching the human sector. They watched during official training hours. They watched during the humans' extra practice sessions. They watched silently, like students observing a master, though the humans were still the weakest fighters on the station. Week 4 brought the hardest challenge yet. It was called the Labyrinth Trial. Teams entered a massive maze filled with obstacles, traps, and combat scenarios. The goal was to reach the center and retrieve an objective marker. The fastest Vraxian team had completed it in 48 minutes. Most teams took over an hour. The humans spent 2 days planning. They couldn't scout the labyrinth beforehand, but they could prepare for uncertainty. Amy created a communication system using their standard equipment. Chris developed a mapping technique that would work even in the maze's electronic dampening field. Nina trained everyone in quick reaction scenarios. Danny practiced the navigation skills he'd learned as a child. When they entered the labyrinth, they moved as one unit. Every turn was recorded. Every trap was documented. When they encountered combat scenarios, they used the tactics they had developed over the past weeks. They didn't try to fight like Vraxians or Keltharians. They fought like humans, using coordination and adaptation. They reached the center in 52 minutes. It wasn't the fastest time, but it was faster than most teams with years of experience. More importantly, they had created a detailed map of the entire labyrinth and documented every trap and obstacle. They shared this information freely with the other teams waiting to attempt the trial. A young Vraxian warrior looked at the map with confusion. "Why do you give us your knowledge?" "We are competitors," Lisa smiled. "We're all here to learn, aren't we? If our information helps you succeed, that's a good thing." The Vraxian didn't understand, but he took the map. His team used it to complete the labyrinth in 43 minutes, breaking the station record. When he emerged, he sought out Lisa and performed a Vraxian salute, a gesture of respect reserved for superior warriors. In the observation gallery, the 3 senior leaders met again. They had been meeting every evening for the past week, discussing the humans. They broke no rules, the Zenthor war chief Zaxel observed, yet they approach every challenge in ways that should not work. "They make their weakness irrelevant," the Keltharian High Master said. "I have never seen such adaptation." Commander Throckmar, who had been silent, finally spoke. "In my 300 years, I have trained warriors from 70 species. All of them rely on their natural advantages. These humans have none, yet they are becoming more dangerous with each passing day. Not because they are strong, but because they refuse to accept their limitations." "Should we increase the difficulty again?" Velkara asked. Throckmar shook his head slowly. "No, I want to see how far they can go on their own. They are teaching us something, though I am not yet certain what it is." By the 6th week, everything had changed on Sentinel Prime, though not in ways anyone had expected. The human delegation still occupied the worst quarters. They were still the weakest fighters in direct combat. They still struggled with equipment designed for larger, stronger beings. But something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere of the training station. Jake noticed it first during the morning exercises. The humans were running their usual early practice session, arriving 2 hours before official training began. This had become their routine, part of the relentless schedule they had maintained since day one. But this morning when they entered the arena, they weren't alone. Arranged along the observation platforms above the training floor stood dozens of alien warriors. Vraxians, Keltharians, Zenthor, and species Jake didn't even recognize. They stood in complete silence, watching. Just watching. "That's new," Chris whispered to Amy as they began their warm-up stretches. "Ignore them," Amy replied, though she too felt the weight of all those eyes. "We have work to do." The humans proceeded with their routine. They ran through their adapted exercises, practiced their coordination drills, and analyzed recordings from the previous day's training. The alien warriors watched every movement. When the humans finished 90 minutes later, the watchers were still there, silent as statues. This became the new normal. Every human training session, official or unofficial, was now observed by groups of alien warriors. They never interfered, never spoke to the humans, never made their presence explicitly known. But they were always there, watching with an intensity that made the humans uncomfortable. "It's like being in a zoo," Danny said one evening, "except we're the animals on display." "Let them watch," Kyle said. "We're not here to impress them. We're here to get better." But the watching continued and it intensified. During combat trials, conversations among the alien warriors would stop mid-sentence when the humans began their exercises. During tactical simulations, groups would gather at the edges of the human sector. The station's observation galleries, which had always been sparsely populated, were now filled whenever the humans trained. Week 7 brought a crucial development. The challenge was a free-form combat scenario called Adaptive Response Protocol. Teams faced unpredictable situations that changed based on their actions. There was no set strategy, no known solution. Teams had to adapt in real time to whatever the simulation threw at them. The Vraxian team went first. They relied on their strength and battle experience, pushing through obstacles with raw power. They completed the scenario successfully, though it took them considerable effort. The Keltharian team used their speed and flexibility, flowing around problems like water. They also succeeded, demonstrating the techniques their species had perfected over millennia. When the human team's turn came, the observation galleries were packed. Jake looked up and saw what must have been 200 alien warriors watching. The arena fell completely silent as his team entered the simulation zone. The scenario began with a hostage situation. Standard protocol would be to negotiate or assault the position. The humans did neither. Specialist Karen White, who had barely spoken during the first weeks but had become increasingly confident, suggested they fake a system malfunction. They created a distraction that made the simulation's enemies think their own equipment was failing, causing confusion that allowed the humans to resolve the situation without direct combat. The scenario shifted to an environmental hazard. Most teams would try to power through it or find protective equipment. The humans analyzed the hazard's patterns, discovered a timing window, and synchronized their movements to pass through safely. Each new challenge was met with a solution that no one had seen before. The humans didn't rely on strength or speed or any physical advantage. They relied on observation, analysis, and innovation. They used their environment. They exploited their enemies' assumptions. They turned every disadvantage into a different kind of advantage. When they completed the scenario, the silence in the arena was deafening. Then something extraordinary happened. A Vraxian warrior in the observation gallery began a slow rhythmic strike of his fist against his chest. It was a Vraxian gesture of respect. One by one, other Vraxians joined him. The sound echoed through the arena like thunder. Jake looked at his team. They were exhausted, bruised, and barely standing. But they had done something impossible. They had earned the respect of the galaxy's greatest warriors. That evening, things began to happen that the humans didn't immediately understand. A group of young Vraxian warriors appeared at the human quarters, requesting permission to observe their analysis session. 3 Keltharian fighters asked if they could watch the humans' tactical planning process. A Zenthor officer quietly recorded one of Amy's training lectures, where she explained how the humans broke down their failures into learnable components. The aliens never asked direct questions. They just watched and listened, as if trying to absorb something they couldn't quite articulate. Velkara approached Jake one evening with an unusual request. The High Council wishes to observe your training methodology. They will be present tomorrow during your standard practice session. The High Council? Jake repeated, surprised. That's the governing body of the entire trials program, isn't it? Yes. They oversee warrior training for all species in this sector of the galaxy. They wish to understand what you are doing. The next morning, the observation galleries were even more crowded than usual. Jake recognized the High Council members by their ornate armor and the deference other warriors showed them. These were legendary figures, warriors who had commanded armies and defended civilizations. The humans conducted their usual training session. They didn't change anything or try to show off. They simply did what they had been doing every day for 6 weeks. They practiced, failed, analyzed their failures, made adjustments, and tried again. They shared information constantly. They celebrated small improvements. They treated every mistake as valuable data. After 2 hours, one of the High Council members descended from the gallery. She was a Keltharian, her age evident in the deep purple of her skin and the countless scars that marked her as a veteran of innumerable battles. She approached Lisa, who was in the middle of explaining a new tactical formation to her squad. "Continue," the council member said simply. "I wish to observe your process more closely." Lisa, to her credit, didn't hesitate. She continued her explanation, using a tablet to show recordings and diagrams. The council member watched silently, but Jake noticed her eyes widening slightly as she followed Lisa's reasoning. "You document everything," the council member observed after Lisa finished. "Every attempt, every failure." "Yes, ma'am," Lisa replied. "If we don't record it, we can't learn from it." "And you share this information with all your warriors? There is no competition between you?" "We're stronger together than separately. If Danny discovers a technique that works, everyone should learn it." "Why would we keep that secret?" The council member was quiet for a long moment. "This is not how warriors traditionally train." "Maybe that's why it works for us," Lisa said. "We're not traditional warriors. We have to find our own way." Over the following days, more changes occurred. The station's training schedules were adjusted to accommodate the alien warriors, who wanted to observe human sessions. Senior instructors began attending the humans' analysis meetings. The station's database recorded that human training videos had been accessed thousands of times by warriors from dozens of species. But the aliens remained silent in the humans' presence. They watched, they recorded, they discussed among themselves in their own languages, but they didn't ask the humans questions. They didn't acknowledge what they were doing. It was as if they were collectively studying something they couldn't yet admit was worth studying. Jake found this silence more unnerving than the initial contempt had been. At least contempt was understandable. This intense, wordless observation felt like they were waiting for something, though he couldn't figure out what. Week 8 brought the final preparation exercises before the culminating trial. These were advanced scenarios designed to test everything learned during the entire training program. The humans approached them the same way they approached everything else, with careful analysis, constant adaptation, and relentless practice. During one scenario, Private Danny Pierce made a mistake that caused his entire team to fail the exercise. It was a simple error, a miscalculation that happened because he was exhausted from weeks of intense training. Most species would have hidden such a mistake or deflected blame. Danny did the opposite. "That was my fault," he announced to the entire team during their analysis session. "I miscalculated the timing. Here's exactly what I did wrong." He showed his error in detail, explaining his thought process and where it had failed. In the observation gallery, a Zenthor warrior turned to his companion. He announces his failure publicly. He shows no shame. The others do not punish him, the companion noted. They thank him for the information. Indeed, the human team was treating Danny's mistake as a gift. They analyzed it thoroughly, understanding how to avoid the same error in the future. They adjusted their protocols based on what they learned. The final gauntlet was held on the 60th day, marking the end of the Trials of Ascension. It was the ultimate test of everything learned during 2 months of intensive training. The challenge combined elements from every previous trial: combat, scenarios, tactical problems, physical challenges, and team coordination exercises. It was designed to push even the most elite warriors to their limits. The testing arena had been transformed into a massive complex that stretched across multiple levels of the station. Each team would face the gauntlet separately, their performance recorded and analyzed by the High Council. The Vraxian teams went first, demonstrating the raw power and endurance that had made their species legendary. The Keltharian teams followed, showcasing speed and precision that seemed almost supernatural. When the human team's turn came, the entire station seemed to stop. The observation galleries were filled beyond capacity. Warriors lined the corridors outside, watching through holographic displays. Even maintenance workers paused their duties to witness what the humans would do. Jake led his team to the starting position. They looked small compared to the teams that had gone before them. Their equipment was still modified for their size, their armor lighter and less imposing than the alien warriors wore. But they moved with confidence born from 60 days of relentless practice and adaptation. The gauntlet began with a combat sequence. The humans faced it the way they had learned to face everything, not trying to match the power of stronger species but using coordination and tactics. Danny drew fire while Nina found weak points. Chris provided timing cues while Amy coordinated movements. They advanced steadily, not quickly but efficiently. The physical challenges came next. Obstacles designed for beings twice their size loomed before them. The humans didn't try to overcome them through strength. They worked together, using leverage and teamwork. Kyle lifted Danny to reach high handholds. Lisa and Karen created human ladders to scale walls. They turned every disadvantage into a problem to be solved. The tactical scenarios were where the humans truly demonstrated what they had learned. They faced situations with no obvious solutions, problems that required improvisation and creative thinking. They modified their environment. They used psychology against their simulated enemies. They found solutions that the scenario's designers hadn't anticipated. When they completed the final gauntlet, their time was middling. They placed in the center rankings neither at the top nor the bottom. By traditional standards, they had performed adequately. They hadn't won, but they hadn't failed either. But Jake knew they had achieved something far more important than a high ranking. They had proven that humans could survive in a galaxy of stronger, faster, more naturally gifted species. They had shown that adaptation could overcome physical limitation. The graduation ceremony was held in the station's Great Hall, a space so massive it could hold thousands of warriors. The alien species stood in their designated sections, arranged by military tradition and honor. The humans stood in their small section, 50 soldiers among thousands of warriors. Commander Throckmar stepped forward to address the assembly. His voice carried throughout the hall without amplification. The trials of ascension have concluded. Each species has demonstrated the qualities that make them worthy of the warrior tradition. He continued with formal acknowledgments, praising the top performers and recognizing exceptional achievements. The humans listened politely, expecting nothing. They had done their best, and that was enough. But then Throckmar did something unprecedented. He turned to face the human section directly. "I would speak with Commander Jake Morrison of Earth." Jake felt every eye in the hall turn toward him. He walked forward, his footsteps seeming impossibly loud in the sudden silence. He stood before Throckmar, being more than twice his height, and waited. "I have a question for you," Throckmar said, his voice carrying a weight that suggested this was not a casual inquiry. "How does your species train its young?" The question seemed simple, but Jake sensed layers beneath it. He thought carefully before responding. "We teach them to try, fail, learn from the failure, and try again. We teach them that mistakes are opportunities to improve. We teach them that working together makes everyone stronger. You do not teach them to be strong? We teach them to become stronger. There's a difference. Strength is what you are. Becoming stronger is what you do." Throckmar was silent for a moment. Then he turned to address the entire assembly. "For 60 days, the warriors of this station have watched the humans train. At first, we watched because they were weak and we expected them to fail. Then we watched because they did something we did not understand. They failed constantly, yet they did not break. They were defeated repeatedly, yet they returned each day with greater capability than before." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I am 300 years old. I have trained warriors for 200 of those years. In all that time, I have never seen a species improve as rapidly as the humans have. I have never seen warriors who treat every defeat as valuable information. I have never seen a species that changes so completely in so short a time." The Keltharian High Master stepped forward to stand beside Throckmar. Her voice was softer, but no less powerful. "Our species train to perfect what we already are. We take our natural advantages and sharpen them like weapons. This is the traditional way, the way it has been done for thousands of years." She looked toward the humans. "The humans have shown us a different path. They do not perfect what they are. They transform what they can become. Every day they are different from the day before. Every challenge changes them. This is not traditional. This is not what we understand as warrior training. This is something new," she continued, "and we must understand it." The Zenthor war chief, who rarely spoke in public, added his voice. "The Galactic Council brought humans to these trials for a reason. We were told it was to test if they were worthy to train alongside the galaxy's elite warriors. This was not the truth." Jake felt his heart rate increase. What was happening? The war chief continued. "The humans were brought here so that we could learn from them. The galaxy's warriors are strong, but we are static. We perfect our traditions, but we do not evolve them. We have become so focused on maintaining what we are that we have forgotten how to become something more." Throckmar spoke again. "For 2 months, the greatest warriors in the galaxy stayed silent as they watched the humans train. We stayed silent because we were learning. We watched your analysis sessions, your failure discussions, your constant adaptation. We recorded your methodologies and studied your processes. We did this without asking because we were not yet ready to admit what we were seeing." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note Jake had never heard from the imposing warrior. It sounded almost like humility. "You came here as the weakest species on this station. You leave having taught the strongest species something they did not know they needed to learn." The hall erupted in sound. It wasn't applause in the human sense, but each species had their own way of showing respect. The Vraxians struck their chests. The Keltharians created a harmonic hum. The Zenthor raised all forearms in salute. The cacophony filled the massive hall. Lisa leaned toward Jake and whispered, "Did we just accidentally revolutionize galactic military training?" "I think we might have," Jake replied, still trying to process what was happening. When the noise subsided, Throckmar continued. The Galactic Council has authorized me to extend an invitation to humanity. 23 warrior species have requested human military advisors. They do not seek advice on combat techniques or tactical formations. They seek to understand your methodology for continuous improvement. They wish to learn how you learn. He looked directly at Jake. The galaxy has warriors aplenty. We have strength, speed, endurance, natural weapons, and centuries of tradition. What we lack is the ability to change, to adapt, to become something we are not. This is the human gift. This is what you have shown us. The Keltharian High Master added, "We will be sending observers to Earth to study your training facilities and educational systems. We wish to understand how a species develops this approach to learning. In return, we offer full access to galactic military archives, technology exchanges, and positions in our advanced strategic programs." Jake looked back at his team. They appeared as surprised as he felt. They had come to Sentinel Prime expecting to prove that humans could survive among stronger species. Instead, they had somehow become teachers to the galaxy's greatest warriors. Later, after the ceremony ended, Jake found himself on an observation deck looking out at the stars. Felkara approached and stood beside him in silence for a moment. "I owe you an apology," the Keltharian instructor said finally. "On your first day I told you I did not expect you to last a week. I was wrong." "You weren't entirely wrong," Jake replied. "We were terrible that first week. But you did not stay terrible. This is the difference. My species, we are excellent warriors. We have always been excellent warriors, but we will always be exactly as excellent as we are now, because we do not change. You were terrible, yes, but you became less terrible every single day. In time, you may become more than excellent. You may become unstoppable.